My mother-in-law looked me straight in the eye, her voice sharp enough to cut through bone. "You're uneducated, jobless, and a disgrace to this family. Get out." I stood there frozen between humiliation and fury, hearing the laughter echo behind me as I packed my things. What she didn't know was that the jobless man she mocked was running a business worth $20 million from the same laptop she said would ruin her daughter's life. I walked out that day without a word. 3 months later, she was on the phone begging for mercy. Funny how the tables turn when the man you kicked out ends up owning the house you live in. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say, "Listening" in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if my story moves you, please subscribe. Not for the numbers, but because every person who joins reminds me that pain can build bridges, not walls. My name's Reed Durrell, and this is how I learned that sometimes walking away is the most powerful answer you can give. I grew up in Bend, Oregon, where winters bit into your bones and the mountains stood silent like witnesses to everything you'd rather forget. Our house wasn't much an old cedar cabin passed down from my grandfather. Its roof sagging and water-stained, the kind of place where you learn to fix things yourself because no one else would. My mother Martha worked the night shift at a diner off Route 97, and when she wasn't pouring coffee for truckers, she was helping part-time at the local library. She smelled like brewed beans and paper dust, and to me that scent meant survival. When I turned 17, I told her I wasn't going to college. We both knew there wasn't enough money for it anyway, but the words still broke her face a little. "You don't have to give up your dreams for me," she said, her hands shaking as she folded another uniform. I told her it wasn't giving up, it was growing up. Someone had to pay rent. Someone had to make sure we didn't lose the house my father left behind before he disappeared for good. That year, I started taking small web jobs, optimizing booking sites for local motels, building simple pages for bed and breakfasts near the mountains. I didn't know it then, but every night spent coding under the dim yellow light would build the foundation of my life. My mother had this saying, "No one defines you by your degree, Reed. People see who you are in what you make and how you treat them." I carried that like gospel. The first version of my dream started in that cold, leaky room. I called it Aero Vista, a platform where travelers could book tours with real locals, guides who actually knew the trails, not some corporate middleman reading from a script. I learned Spanish from YouTube tutorials and message boards so I could reach more people. Every keystroke felt like I was building an exit out of poverty line by line. One night the rain came harder than usual. I was coding in my hoodie, the one that said "Bend Trails," when the ceiling started to drip. I didn't stop. I just put a bucket under it and kept going. I added one small line of text to the bottom of my page, "Made in Bend for Mom." The next morning, I woke up to a notification someone had left a review. A traveler from Arizona had found my little site, booked a hiking guide through it, and wrote, "Better than the big guys, authentic and easy." A 5-star review. It was small, but it changed everything. Traffic tripled overnight. I spent days figuring out how to handle payments, refunds, and customer emails I barely understood. When Mom got home and I told her, she laughed and cried at the same time. "See, kid," she said, touching the screen with her worn fingers, "you're already building something that matters." That week, an email came from a travel conference in Seattle. They invited me to give a short talk about small business tech. I didn't even finish reading before I clicked decline. I wasn't ready. Who'd listen to a kid from Bend who hadn't even graduated college? But that night, as I stared at the dripping ceiling, I thought of Mom working late again, smiling through exhaustion. I promised myself that one day I'd go. 6 months later, when the same conference emailed again, I didn't hesitate. I clicked accept. Aero Vista was ready for the world, and so was I. The rain in Seattle was different, colder, louder, like it wanted to wash the city clean, but never quite could. I remember walking into the conference hall that morning, hands sweating, wearing the only decent shirt I owned. The lobby smelled like roasted coffee and polished wood, and the sound of tapping shoes on marble made me realize just how far I was from Bend. I was the last speaker in a small room tucked behind the main stage. 5 minutes. That's all they gave me. My voice shook at first when I started talking about Aero Vista, a local first travel platform where tourists can see a place through the eyes of people who live there. A few heads nodded politely, but most were checking their phones, except for one woman standing at the back. She was smiling, really smiling, like she meant it. Afterward, she walked up to me. "That's a beautiful idea," she said. "I work at the Meridian Hotel. Our guests are always looking for authentic local experiences. Have you thought about partnering with hotels?" Her name was Jasmine Carter. She had dark hair pulled back in a braid and this way of looking at you that made you feel like you mattered. We ended up talking in the hotel cafe for hours about travel, about growing up in small towns, about the weight of other people's expectations. She told me her mom, Evelyn, was a retired professor in Napa, sharp-minded but demanding. "She thinks degrees are everything," Jasmine said, laughing softly. "She'd probably have a heart attack if she knew I skipped grad school." We started seeing each other after that. I'd take the bus from Bend to Seattle on weekends, staying in cheap motels so I could spend time with her. She'd bring me free coffee from the lobby. I'd bring her new code updates to look at. Jasmine wasn't just beautiful, she was smart, organized, practical. She gave feedback that made Aero Vista better. "You should vet local hosts more carefully," she said one night. "Add a safety contact feature. People need to feel secure." I built it in 3 days. Within a month, user numbers doubled. A year passed fast. Aero Vista was finally profitable. I'd hired 2 part-time developers. One night, under a canopy of fairy lights in her apartment courtyard, I asked Jasmine to marry me. She said yes before I even finished the sentence. The wedding was small, held in a community garden in Seattle. It rained, of course. The guests laughed under umbrellas. The air smelled like wet earth and wildflowers. My mom came up from Bend wearing a borrowed dress, crying the whole time. "You did good, kid," she whispered as she hugged me. "But behind every perfect picture, there's a shadow waiting." The night before the ceremony, Jasmine had received an email from her mother. She never showed it to me, but I saw the subject line flash across her phone. "Don't ruin your future for someone without a degree." She deleted it quickly, pretending she hadn't read it. I didn't ask. Some battles are better left alone, at least for a while. At the reception, when everyone was dancing, my phone buzzed with a new message. A venture fund from San Francisco wanted to meet about investing in Aero Vista. My hands trembled as I read it. It could change everything. I looked at Jasmine laughing under the string lights and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Not tonight, I thought. She deserved one night without talk of risk or money. As we packed for our honeymoon, Jasmine turned to me and said softly, "After the trip, can we spend some time in Napa? Mom's been alone a lot. It'd make her happy." I smiled and nodded. I wanted to make her happy too. I didn't know then that by agreeing, I wasn't just moving closer to her family, I was stepping straight into the storm that would tear everything apart. The first time I saw Napa, it looked like a painting pretending to be real gold hills, rolling vineyards, the sun hanging low as if it didn't want to leave. But stepping into Evelyn Carter's house felt less like entering a home and more like walking into a museum where everything was labeled, "Don't touch." The dining table stretched longer than any I'd ever seen, gleaming silver cutlery lined with precision. Even the chairs looked uncomfortable in their perfection. Evelyn greeted us with the kind of smile you'd expect from someone who'd already decided she didn't like you. "Read," she said, handing me a glass of wine before I could sit. "You didn't tell me what university you graduated from. I assume it was something respectable." Her voice was sugar wrapped around a knife. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my tone steady. "I didn't go to college. I started my company right after high school." A company, she said, amused. "Doing what exactly? It's called Aero Vista. It connects travelers with local guides, small tours, authentic experiences." Evelyn tilted her head like she was examining an insect. "How charming. Well, everyone has to start somewhere, but maybe leave the big ideas to people with real experience." Across the table, Jasmine stiffened. She glanced at me, then back at her plate, silently begging me not to make it worse. I smiled politely. "Experience comes in many forms, Mrs. Carter. Mine just didn't require a campus." She poured herself another glass of wine, ignoring me. The room fell quiet except for the sound of forks against porcelain. When dinner ended, I offered to help clean up. Evelyn waved me off with a flick of her hand. Money isn't the problem here, Reed. Discipline is. Anyone living under my roof follows my rules. Structure keeps chaos away. The next morning I woke early and went for a walk through the vineyard behind the house. The air smelled of soil and ripening grapes, but inside everything felt tense and controlled. I noticed a handwritten list on the fridge titled House Rules. It was full of instructions: wake by 7, no shoes in the foyer, meals at exact times. There wasn't a single rule about kindness. Over the next few days, I fixed the Wi-Fi, updated her security system, and repaired a leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, the room she'd assigned to me and Jasmine instead of the master suite. When I suggested paying part of the bills, Evelyn's eyes flashed. Don't insult me. You're our guest. Guests don't pay. That night, as I was working in the guest room, my laptop humming softly, I noticed a plain envelope on her desk when I walked past the study. It wasn't sealed, just resting there under a stack of papers. Out of habit, I glanced at it and saw the words, "Loan Payment Reminder," printed on the header. I pretended not to notice, but I filed the image in my mind. People like Evelyn didn't forget things. They hid them. Later that week, after everyone had gone to bed, I heard her voice through the thin walls. She was on the phone, laughing quietly. "She's in love, that's for sure," she said to whoever was on the other end. "But give it a year. She'll see what I mean. He's not going anywhere." Her tone dripped with confidence, and each word landed like a slap. I sat there staring at the dark screen of my laptop, feeling something inside me shift. Anger wanted to speak, but I pushed it down. I thought about my mother's words. Don't fight fools with words. Build something they can't ignore. At midnight, I opened a new spreadsheet: plans for Aerovista's next phase. 12 months of growth budgets projections. At the top, I wrote Napa operations and added one quiet column in red: risk management. Before closing the laptop, I whispered to myself, don't react. Prove her wrong with results. 6 months later, summer had soaked every inch of Napa in heat. The vines outside shimmered under the sun, heavy with fruit, but the house stayed cold. Evelyn had turned it into a world of unspoken rules and measured breaths. By then, I'd learned that no matter how early I woke, she was always up first, waiting with her morning coffee, like a warden starting her shift. My workdays began at 7. I handled Aerovista's calls, meetings, and product updates from the kitchen table, headphones and laptop open, trying to ignore the constant footsteps around me. Our platform had expanded to Europe. I was managing guides in Spain and Portugal now. From the outside, I looked calm. Inside, I was burning. One afternoon, Evelyn appeared behind me, watching as I typed. "You sit here all day," she said, staring at that screen. "You should get outside, do something real. People learn discipline through labor." Before I could answer, she dropped a list onto the counter. "Groceries. The floor in the pantry needs cleaning. And trim the vines by the back gate. They're unsightly." I glanced at Jasmine, hoping she'd say something, but she just bit her lip. Later, when I confronted her gently, she sighed. "She doesn't mean harm, Reed. She thinks she's teaching you responsibility." I laughed quietly. "Teaching me responsibility? Jasmine, I've been working since I was 17. For a while, I did everything Evelyn asked: bought groceries, scrubbed tiles, trimmed the vines that weren't mine. I told myself it was temporary. At night, after everyone slept, I'd stay up coding, building a small San Francisco branch of Aerovista under a different business name. No one knew. It was my insurance policy. Then came the dinner party. Evelyn hosted a wine-tasting evening for her friends, all former colleagues from her university days. The house smelled of roasted lamb and oak barrels. As I carried in plates, she introduced me with a laugh. "This is Reed, our live-in tech support. Handy around the house, decent with Wi-Fi." Laughter erupted. I smiled politely, poured more wine, and reminded myself that silence could be sharper than any retort. Later that night, I passed by her study and heard her voice again, low and bitter. Jasmine could have married that doctoral candidate from Stanford, she was saying to her friend. Instead, she picked the kid with the cheap laptop. Can you imagine? I stood outside the door, gripping the wall. The urge to storm in and confront her nearly drowned me. Instead, I walked away. When I reached the kitchen, I noticed something half buried under a stack of mail. Another envelope from the bank, this one stamped "Final Notice." My heart slowed. I slipped it open just enough to see her name, the overdue balance, the threat of foreclosure. I took a photo and forwarded it to my own email. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I'd need it. That weekend, Jasmine and I sat on the porch. The evening light painted her face gold. She reached for my hand. I know things are hard with Mom. She's strict, but she means well. Does she? I asked quietly, because it feels like she's testing how far she can push until something breaks. She just wants what's best for us. I looked out over the vineyard, the leaves curling at the edges, thirsty from neglect. One day I said, "You'll see that silence isn't love, Jasmine. It's surrender." She didn't answer. The wind carried our words away. That night after she went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The air smelled of lemons and detergent. My laptop glowed in the dark screen filled with Vista's financial dashboard. The company had just crossed the $1 million mark. I stared at the number, feeling something cold and electric move through me. Evelyn thought I was her unpaid help, her daughter's mistake, a man trapped under her roof. She had no idea that the hired hand she mocked was quietly signing contracts that would soon own half the routes her luxury travel clients depended on. I closed the laptop, the reflection of the blue light fading across the countertop. "You want me to play the role of the servant?" I whispered to the empty kitchen. "Fine. But never forget the servant's the one who signs the checks." Evelyn's birthday dinner was the kind of gathering that reeked of wealth and insecurity at once. The house was lit like a stage set, all golden chandeliers and laughter polished to sound effortless. Her friends filled the dining room, professors, retired deans, academics who still wore their achievements like armor. The smell of roasted lamb and old wine clung to the air, heavy and sweet. Jasmine had begged me to stay. "Just for tonight," she whispered. "Please, let's not make a scene." I agreed for her sake. I told myself I could endure one more evening of polite humiliation. When Evelyn raised her glass, all conversation hushed. "Thank you all for coming," she said, beaming. "It's not often we get to celebrate with family. My daughter and her husband are here too, read everyone. He works from home." Her voice lingered on that last phrase like it was a punchline. "A real entrepreneur, he calls himself. Isn't that adorable?" A few chuckles broke out around the table. One man, a gray-haired professor with wire-rimmed glasses, smirked. "Working from home, huh? I wish I could get paid to stay in my pajamas too." The laughter grew. Jasmine's hand tightened around her fork. I forced a smile and took a sip of wine. "Well," I said quietly, "some jobs don't need a campus to prove their worth." Evelyn lifted her glass again, pretending she hadn't heard me. "Oh, Reed, don't be so serious. We're all just having fun." The night went on like that, small cuts disguised as jokes, laughter wrapped around contempt. I sat through everyone, my chest tightening with every toast, every smug grin. I thought of my mother, of the nights she came home from the diner too tired to stand but still managed to ask how I was doing. She would have told me to walk away before losing my temper. I tried. But then when I stood to help clear the plates, Evelyn's voice cut across the room. "Leave that," she said loudly, her smile thin. "The house staff will take care of it." She looked straight at me, and for a moment the whole room froze. The words hung there sharp and deliberate. Something in me went still. Jasmine's lips parted, but no sound came out. I placed my napkin gently on the table. "I don't want to argue," I said, my voice steady, "but I think it's time I go." Evelyn's face tightened. "Don't be dramatic. We're just teasing you." I turned to Jasmine. "You don't have to come. I'll be fine." Her eyes glistened, torn between me and her mother. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll talk to her tomorrow." I nodded, knowing she wouldn't. As I walked toward the door, I heard Evelyn's voice again, low but clear enough for everyone to catch. "I won't let my daughter be dragged down by someone who never finished school." That was the moment the air broke. I didn't look back. Outside, the night was cold and quiet. I walked to the garage where my car waited under the soft hum of a single bulb. On the passenger seat sat an old leather ledger, Evelyn's left open pages filled with numbers and signatures. A list of loans all tied to Carter Estate. One of the creditors' names jumped out at me, a financial firm in San Francisco I'd worked with during Aero Vista's early expansion. I stared at the page, my pulse steadying. There it was, the truth behind the empire she flaunted. I snapped a picture, closed the book, and set it back exactly where I found it. As I pulled out of the driveway, rain began to fall, streaking across the windshield in silver lines. The house behind me glowed in the distance, filled with laughter that already sounded foreign. I didn't feel anger anymore, just clarity. Halfway up the mountain road, I stopped the car. The valley stretched below, dark and vast. I opened my phone and checked Aero Vista's dashboard. A new email notification popped up. Contract signed. U.S. expansion deal approved. Value, $12,000 our. I exhaled slowly, feeling the world tilt back into balance. So this is what it takes, I murmured. To be called uneducated. I leaned back, watching the rain trace patterns on the glass. Somewhere behind me, Evelyn was still celebrating her birthday. She had no idea her little house guest had just become the man who could buy the very roof over her head. The ocean outside my villa in Kona was the color of liquid glass. Every morning I woke to the sound of waves crashing against black rock and the scent of salt drifting through open windows. My days were quiet now, meetings at dawn with teams in Europe, late-night calls with investors. Aero Vista had exploded beyond anything I'd imagined. The same laptop Evelyn once mocked now controlled an empire. One morning as I sipped coffee on the balcony, my assistant forwarded a batch of acquisition reports. Aero Vista's finance division had completed a purchase of several California property loans from a struggling bank. I scrolled through the list, absent-mindedly, until a familiar name appeared. Carter Estate, Napa Valley. I stared at the screen. The irony was almost poetic. Evelyn's home was now collateral under my company's umbrella. The universe had a cruel sense of symmetry. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Reed Jasmine's voice was trembling. It's Mom. The bank's taking the house. They sent notice this morning. Please, you have to help us. For a moment, I said nothing. The sound of the ocean filled the silence between us. Jasmine, I said softly. I already have helped. You just never knew how much. There was rustling, then Evelyn's voice took over the line, brittle and desperate. Reed, I know we've had our differences, but you can't let this happen. I raised my daughter to marry a good man. Prove me right. Don't let her lose everything. I closed my eyes, leaning against the balcony rail. I'm not letting anyone lose anything, Mrs. Carter. But that house, it's owned by Aero Vista now. I'm sure the new management will treat the residents fairly. The silence that followed was long enough to measure the tide by. When Evelyn finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. You're lying. I'm not, I said. Check the deed. Then I hung up. For the first time in years, I felt no weight on my chest, only stillness. News of the acquisition spread quickly. The local paper ran a headline a week later. Tech firm from Bend buys. Dozens of luxury estates facing foreclosure. CEO identity unknown. I pictured Evelyn reading it, shaking her head, unable to connect the dots. That night, I opened Aero Vista's internal files again. In the Carter folder, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: records of a massive loan Evelyn had taken years ago to fund Jasmine's wedding. She'd used her house as collateral to throw the event that now existed only in photographs and regret. I sat there for a while, staring at the numbers. It wasn't victory that I felt. It was something quieter, heavier. Revenge never really satisfied. It just ended the noise. Still, I couldn't bring myself to push the foreclosure order through. I signed a temporary extension instead, 3 months to settle their debts. Maybe they'd learned something about humility. Maybe not. Either way, I was done carrying the burden of their judgment. The next morning, I saw a piece in the San Francisco Chronicle: Aero Vista's CEO raised in Bend, quietly reshaping the travel industry. My photo wasn't there just a silhouette against a map. Evelyn would see it, no doubt. She'd read those words, raised in Bend, and remember the boy she told to get out of her house. That evening the phone rang again, but I didn't answer. I walked down to the shore instead, letting the waves crash against my ankles. The horizon glowed orange, and for the first time in years I felt the kind of peace that doesn't need witnesses. Back in the villa, I poured another cup of coffee and opened my laptop. The security feed from Napa still worked the system I'd installed myself. On the screen, Evelyn sat slumped over the dining table, the same one where she'd once introduced me as her house tech. Jasmine was beside her, shoulders shaking as she tried to comfort her mother. I turned off the monitor and sat in silence. "You told me I wasn't enough," I said under my breath. "Now you finally understand what enough really means." Outside, the sea kept moving steady and endless. I watched until the light faded, then began booking a flight back to California. Some debts I decided needed to be settled face to face. The fog rolled in from the bay that afternoon, brushing against the glass of the high-rise like ghostly fingertips. From my office, the Bay Bridge glowed through the haze, a line of light stretching across the water, distant but steady. The conference table was already set, 3 glasses of water, a stack of contracts, and the silence of something inevitable. When Evelyn and Jasmine walked in, I stood to greet them. Evelyn wore a navy coat too fine for the day's gray chill, her chin lifted, her voice controlled. Jasmine looked smaller beside her, her eyes flicking toward me but never quite meeting mine. "Thank you for coming," I said, motioning for them to sit. "I thought it would be better to handle this in person." Evelyn placed her purse on the table like it was a shield. "We're here to discuss the property," she said. "The house in Napa is part of our family's history. There must be a way to—" I slid a folder toward her. "There's nothing to negotiate. The debt's been cleared. Completely." Her eyes narrowed. "Cleared. What do you mean?" "Cleared, I said calmly. "I erased it. The house is yours again." She blinked, unsure whether to be relieved or insulted. "Are you mocking me, Reed? No?" I said, my voice even. "I'm doing something you told me I never could, making a decision with my own money." The words hung between us like a match waiting to burn. Jasmine's hand reached across the table, trembling slightly as she squeezed her mother's wrist. Evelyn exhaled slowly, trying to hold on to her poise. "Why?" she asked finally. "After everything I said to you, why would you do this?" I looked at her and then at Jasmine. "Because I'm done carrying it. For 2 years, Aerovista quietly paid your property taxes and utilities. I never said a word. I wanted to keep peace for Jasmine's sake, but that peace was never real. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to end it." The only sound in the room was the hum of the city below. For the first time, Evelyn's voice softened. "You're saying you covered our bills?" I nodded. "Every month. While you called me jobless, the company you dismissed as a hobby was keeping your lights on." Evelyn looked away. Her reflection in the window seemed older, smaller. She reached into her bag, pulled out an envelope, and slid it toward me. Inside was a certificate for shares Aerovista's tourism fund. "I bought this last quarter," she said weakly. "It was performing well. I didn't even realize." She trailed off, her eyes flicking to mine. "You're the one running it, aren't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Jasmine finally spoke, her voice a whisper. "I knew, Reed. I knew you'd been paying the taxes. I found the receipts last year, but I didn't say anything. I thought if I did, Mom would feel humiliated." I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion settling deep in my bones. "I understand," I said quietly. "But silence can be crueler than words. When you chose not to speak, you chose her side, not ours." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. Evelyn sat frozen, clutching the envelope like it was the last fragment of her pride. I pulled another document from my folder, divorce papers already signed. I slid them across the table. "You deserve to live your truth, Jasmine," I said. "And I deserve peace." Evelyn's voice cracked. "You're walking away from everything I already did," I said, standing. 3 months ago. For a long moment, no one moved. The city lights outside flickered against the glass like a heartbeat. Jasmine reached for the papers, her hand trembling as she pressed her initials on the dotted line. She didn't look up. When they rose to leave, Evelyn turned once more. "You could have destroyed us, Reed. Why didn't you?" I looked at her not with anger but with something close to pity. "Because I learned from you what power really is. It's not control. It's choice. And I choose to be done." As the door closed behind them, my attorney stepped in. "Do you want me to arrange the deed transfer? You could still reclaim the property." I stared out at the bridge glowing through the fog. "No," I said. "I don't need their house. I just need the quiet they never let me have." By morning I would be gone back to Hawaii, back to the ocean, back to where the noise couldn't reach me. The plane landed just after sunrise. Hawaii greeted me with salt air and light spilling across the horizon like a new beginning. My mother was waiting by the arrivals gate, smaller than I remembered her, silver hair glowing in the morning sun. When she saw me, she smiled, no judgment, no questions, just pride. Driving home along the coast, she rolled the window down and let the wind whip through her hair. "You did it, Reed," she said softly, looking at the ocean. "You built a life from nothing." The villa sat above a stretch of black rock and turquoise water. When she stepped inside, she touched the walls, tracing them like they were made of dreams. "You built this," she whispered. "We built it," I said. That evening we ate dinner on the veranda. The air smelled of grilled fish and sea salt. We talked about Bend, about the diner where she used to work, about the nights she'd come home so tired she couldn't untie her apron. I told her everything, the marriage, the humiliation, the night I left Napa for good. She listened without interruption, her gaze fixed on the sea. When I finished, she said quietly, "Forgiveness isn't about them, son. It's about freeing yourself from their shadow." I nodded, staring at the horizon where the sky met the water. "I think I'm ready," I said. Later that night, I opened my laptop on the same wooden table where I'd started Aero Vista years ago. I signed the final document transferring ownership of the Napa property to a scholarship foundation for underprivileged students. One click, and the last tie to that life was gone. A week later, an article appeared online. Aero Vista donates $6.4 million property to California Open Roads Fund. The photo showed smiling students holding certificates. Behind them stood Evelyn Carter, her posture softer, her expression almost grateful. An email arrived soon after. It was from Jasmine. "Thank you. Mom's working again at the Napa Tourism Center. She's different now, humble. I hope you found peace." I read it twice, then closed my laptop. 2 days later, an old friend from Bend, Noah, arrived unannounced. He'd been with me back when Aero Vista was just an idea on a cracked screen. We spent the evening walking the beach, talking about everything and nothing. "I always knew you'd make it," he said. "You turned what they threw at you into the thing that built you." That night after he left, I stood on the shore waves tugging at my feet. The sea was endless, calm, alive. My phone buzzed an email from a European firm offering a partnership. I smiled, letting the wind take the decision for me. Mom came out with a blanket, wrapping it around my shoulders. "Cold?" she asked. "Not anymore," I said. We stood there listening to the rhythm of the waves. I thought of Evelyn and Jasmine somewhere on the mainland rebuilding their lives. I wished them well. I wished them freedom, the same kind I'd fought to earn. As dawn broke, I whispered into the wind. They called me uneducated, a failure. But without those words, I might never have learned my worth. The sun rose, spilling gold over the water. I closed my laptop and watched the tide pull everything old away. Aero Vista kept running silent and steady. And for the first time, I wasn't chasing anything, I was simply living. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't the ones you fight out loud. They're the ones you fight in silence, proving your worth to people who never cared to see it. I used to think success would make everything right, that once I had the money, the power, the respect, the pain would fade. But it doesn't work that way. The truth is, peace doesn't come from being above others. It comes from finally standing on your own ground, looking back at all the scars, and realizing you made it through without letting them turn you bitter. If you've ever been called not enough, not smart enough, not educated enough, not worthy enough, I want you to remember this. Their words don't define your ceiling. You do. I was once a kid, coding under a leaking roof, mocked for dreaming too high. Now I wake up every morning to the sound of the ocean, not because I wanted revenge, but because I refused to quit. Life has a way of coming full circle. The people who tried to break you often end up teaching you the strength to rebuild. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving them wrong, it's realizing you no longer need to. So wherever you are right now, maybe sitting in a quiet room, maybe driving home from a job that's wearing you down, I hope my story reminds you that patience, grit, and kindness to yourself are the real answers. Don't let anyone shame you for starting small. Every empire begins in silence. If this story found a piece of you, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I love seeing how far these words can travel. And if you felt something, even a spark, hit subscribe. Not for me, but for you, for the reminder that you're not alone in this fight to rise above what tried to define you. Because sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's strength. And sometimes forgiveness isn't surrender, it's freedom.